we've talked a lot about different pricing of different managed service providers, managed security services providers, and a lot of things that make up those kinds of programs. If somebody's thinking about changing from company A to company B, what kinds of things do they need to do before they pull that trigger?
So, at a very base starting point, since we just talked about MSAs, you ought to understand the contract you have with your current provider. I think you ought to understand not just the term, end date, which is probably the most important point, renewal date, those types of things. Is there a termination clause? We just talked about there should be, part of the MSA agreement is what's the term, what's the termination rules, how does that engagement work, what if I want to get out early, is there a fee, what if people in the telecom world, ETF, early termination fee, how do I know now is the right time to be looking for a new provider, and how can I easily make a change? And that contract status is one of the things that really comes to mind. And we run into this all the time in the telecom world, because people have these contracts, don't even remember the last time they signed them. Well, I think I signed something with AT&T, or was it Verizon? Or they start to think about that stuff, but do they really know what the end date is and what the impact of breaking that contract is? So I think it's really important to understand what your current terms of engagement are. And then you have to start looking to get your ducks in a row. What do I have for equipment? Earlier on you said, how do you figure out pricing? Well, we're going to ask a bunch of questions during our discovery. How many computers do you have? How many laptops do you have? How many servers do you have? How many end users, real computer users? Then you start getting into licensing. Okay, what do you have for licensing? Are you a Microsoft Office shop? Are you a Google Workspace shop? What licensing do you own? What levels of licensing? Are you buying them month to month? Are you buying them a year at a time? Are you prepaying? There's all these rules of dealing with licensing. In a perfect world, you push a button and all of this stuff spits out of a system. I know we have that capability, maybe not everyone does, but you want to know the hardware you have, you want to know the software that's in use, and you really want to know what you have for licensing so that you can easily make a transition, as opposed to the worst thing of all, finding out after the fact. We forgot. Where did we have that? We ran into a situation where the previous provider wouldn't turn over the licensing information, and the client had to buy all new licensing. Is that crazy? Of course it's crazy. But they wouldn't give them a run book that had all the details of passwords, information on the equipment, right down to switches, firewalls, routers, Wi-Fi. All the pieces should be inventoried to make it as easy as possible to make a transition. I think that's what's important to know.
Well, you mentioned the run book and the passwords, and I'm a firm believer that the administrative passwords to the domain are owned by the client, not the managed service provider. And
all of this stuff should be owned by the client, really.
Yes, but the administrative password is probably one of the biggest showstoppers if you can't get a hold of that. Yeah. Now, been in this business for a long time. There's been plenty of transitions for clients coming to me from another provider and losing clients to other providers. And the vast majority are smooth transitions because everybody's been on both sides of them. Yeah. However, knowing your admin password, if you get to a situation where you cannot get that out of your MSP, that can really put you into a tough position if they start to be sticklers about it. So
yeah, especially if there's only one domain admin account, or you don't know that there's two or three and don't have those credentials either. Yeah. It becomes, then you're in for a battle.
So even if you're not looking at a current change, there's the things you ought to think about having. You own them, you ought to have a copy of them, they ought to be secured, but you ought to have all that information because you own it.
It's your system.
And you don't have to ask for it the day you're thinking about making a change.
Yeah, no, because then it's going to be contentious, or potentially contentious.
Yeah.
I think it is a really, really important thing to know. And there's certain other passwords, firewall is another one. If you don't have that, there is no way to recover it.
Yeah.
You wipe the firewall clean and start from scratch and start building rules, setting up VPNs from scratch. It's a really, really big deal on
That
certain
documentation
items.
is critical.
Yeah, it definitely is. Run book.
Great. Well.